What's up, everybody? It's Connor Tuck, and we are here to do a year in review of our shifting real estate market in South Jersey, Burlington, Camden, Gloucester counties of New Jersey, 900,000 and below. And it's been a while. It's been a while since we've chatted again. But let's really do this because the year is coming to a close, and it is time for us to actually take a look and see what the heck happened to real estate in 2024 as we enter our 2025 year. So I obviously have a couple things brought up here on the screen, and we're going to work through them. The main four graphs are what we're going to really focus on today. 1, the interest rates. 2, the total active listings we had throughout the year. 3, what happened with list prices. And then what was going on with days on market and how did that kind of flow throughout the year. So the biggest takeaway from this year was that we had a big spike in July, and that was sort of the crescendo of the entire year. A lot of things went into why it crescendoed there. We won't get too deep in the weeds with that. I just want this to be more of a what actually happened, what can we expect, sort of going into next year in terms of both the psychology of the buyers and sellers out there right now, as well as the macroeconomic trends that we can actually watch. So just a first quick note, and I left this here for a reason. I was thinking about taking this out. But homes sold, right? So I went and actually revised these. I ran fresh reports and I got fresh numbers as things, because there's always some little corrections that get made year over year. So 2 years ago in 22, 17,551 homes sold. Last year, 1,447. This year, 14,047. And this year, 13,412. So we have come down year over year now in terms of the amount of properties that have been sold. Obviously, a bigger jump from 22 to 23 than from 23 to 24, but it should be noted that we have come down again. This was seen on the national scene as well. We had one of the lowest amount of homes sold in the U.S. in years. Years, not like 1 or 2, like 10 to 15, right? The amount of homes that actually sold. So we've kind of trended alongside the rest of the country when it came to us having a down year in real estate. But let's talk about a couple of these things. So let's just first talk a little bit about total active listings. So blue is going to be last year, red is going to be this year. Now, the one thing you can see, obviously, in the beginning of last year, we dropped down. And we've talked about this a lot of times. Last year, at the beginning of the year, was that big inflation period. That's where we had such a big drop. But then you could see we rebounded pretty nicely after that. But then this year, basically every single month, March on, there was way more inventory this year than there was last year. So if you were a seller this year, you probably didn't get quite as many multiple bids. You didn't get quite as much of a feeding frenzy when you went on the market as you would have last year, right? And that was true. Having shown a lot of properties, having listed properties this past year, I can say that without a doubt, that was very true to me. Listings that we put on didn't have quite the fervor, and as buyers, there was a lot more options. It was a less stressful buying period. I actually thought it was better for all parties. Now, sellers would have still loved to get that amazingly high pressured, but that was never really sustainable. You're going to find that in micro economies and micro pockets for short periods of time. It's very rarely going to be that every listing all the time gets so many offers. So I do like to see that at least where we are ending the year here, right? Coming from January of last year all the way up, kind of hovering at 1,400, coming down a bit, but then really rebounding a lot of inventory throughout this year. That, to me, is healthy going into next year. I was a little nervous about where the inventory was last year, especially if it started to continue to go down, which it did a little bit, but it rebounded very quickly once we kind of got through the early bit of the winter and kind of into the start of the spring market. So for me, all projections for 2025 for listing inventory, we are solid right now because we actually have a lot of good homes to choose from. All right, let's jump into interest rates for a second. I want to kind of break it up with the bar graphs here. And sorry for my screen flipping all over the place here. I just want to come back. All right, so as I start to look at this, now as of this past week, they were supposed to have an updated interest rate just at the time of recording this. They hadn't updated it from today for the Fed. But 6.72% interest rate. Now, when I look back at our graph here, so this graph is actually going back 2 years, right? So when I go back 2 years, you can see that all the way back at the beginning of 2023, we were down at that interest rate, and then it started to climb, right? Our interest rate really started to climb, and it climbed, and it climbed, and it climbed, and it peaked all the way right before Halloween of last year at 7.79, by far the highest interest rate that we've had in the last 2 years. And then from that October all the way to the start of the year, we lost almost in literally, 3 months, we went down a full percentage point in interest rate. So we started the year very optimistically that we were going to see that trend continue. It did not. From that point until basically where we just wrapped up, we have a difference of 1/10 of a percentage point effectively from when we started the year to where we ended the year. So not much different at the end of the year than we did at the beginning, but you can see the first half of the year, we really had a nice kind of increase in those interest rates, peaking at about 7.22% for the year. And then we went all the way down, funny enough, in October again, down to 6.08. Well, I guess that was technically right at the end of September, but you get the gist. So we were at 6.08. So, but really, between 7.02 and 6.08 as the highs and the lows of the year, only about a 1.2% difference between the top and the bottom. We just kind of followed along. And again, if we think about that peak in July, interest rates were still near their highs for where they were. Now, I think what people had looked at is saying like, hey, well, even though we've increased a little bit and we're starting to fall back down here, we're still way lower than where we peaked in 2023, which, I totally get. That's fine. But for me, interest rates kind of going into the projections for next year, who the hell knows? No one knows what's going on with interest rates. Fiscal policy has been really difficult to follow, honestly, with all of the election stuff and what they're planning on doing with all of this. But I have heard from some projections from some lenders and things like that, most people don't see the interest rates dropping precipitously this year. We thought the refinance market was going to be a little bit more attractive. I don't think it's going to be overly attractive. If anything, we'll probably see interest rates hover around this bit. They might go up a bit. They might go down a bit. That ain't much for a crystal ball, but that's interest rates for you. So let's talk about days on market, and then I want to wrap up with the listing price, because I think that's probably one of the most important. For me, days on market is... I know it may seem like an afterthought, but what this really is driving at so much is the competitiveness of the market, right? When I have a low days on market, that means that the market's very competitive, inventory is going quickly, and when my days on market are higher, it means that it's a slower time of year or there's just not quite as much buyer demand. And we saw that our peaks both basically for the blue was last year and the red is this year. For last year, right, it was a little bit higher, right? Days on market were actually a little bit higher, which is interesting because this year we had more inventory but less days on market. And that I thought was a little odd, right? So when we come back here to our total active listings, we had more listings, but they weren't sitting on market for as long. Whereas last year we had much less inventory, we had way less listings, but they sat for a little bit longer. So almost an inverse correlation you would see there. Normally, you would see it probably the opposite, where as we have more listings, you're seeing them sit for a little bit longer right? And then as it goes the other way. So that's definitely a little interesting to me that those two things flipped as we turn the year, all right? But average days on market, again, we still kind of rode the same wave in the beginning part of the year. It started to get chipped away at as the spring market heated up, kind of bottomed out around that July, August time. And then we started to see it climb a little bit more back up as we got into the election season. And then now, obviously, as we're getting into the winter season, a pretty big jump back up here to 65 and 62 across those 2 different years. All right. Now, the last and most important one, in my opinion, is to review the average median list price, right? It's the median list price that I care about to take out some of those high highs and those low lows, but the median to me is the best one to do it, but it's the average of all the medians. Anyway, so same thing. Last year was in blue, right? That inflation period we saw increase in blue, and then we peaked around that 340, 339 sort of list price throughout the year last year, right? Beginning of this year, we picked right back up, but we shot straight up, right? We shot up almost $40,000 in list price in a matter of 6 months. That was stressful. That was very stressful to a lot of people. I will say the first half of this year felt very frenzied when it came to the price you were trying to price your listing at, as well as what you were trying to offer as a buyer. And appraisals were shooting darts. I mean, it was hard to understand where you were supposed to be from an appraisal, and I luckily only had to deal with about 2 or 3 short appraisals this year, both on the buy side and on the sell side. So what I have actually liked to see, not as a homeowner, but as a real estate agent, I've liked to see that our listing price had a nice kind of coming back down moment. We peaked again in that June all the way up at 371, and now we've come down to 355, but what you can see is we've been fairly consistent and very consistent really across these last 4 months coming into December here of a nice 355 to 360 list price. And I think for us, as we kind of wrap up, I think that's where I'm happiest at the moment, is to see that we're at a fairly good list price at the moment. I don't want or expect to see that go up all that much next year. I think that's actually going to be something that's will stay steady for a little while. I think the things that are outside of our control at the moment are what's going to happen with the economy come post-February election, and well, I guess actually the inauguration is what we should really call that, and just how the market's going to respond in this first year to our new president. This isn't a for him or against him thing. This is just for our purposes here of trying to track what we got going on here. It's hard to predict. What I will say, though, is that I do believe in 2025 we should see a little bounce back in overall units sold. I don't think that we're going to be staying in the 13,000 units sold over the course of next year. I think we should expect to see this go back up again. I expect to see that the total active listings will stay healthy. I do expect to see that our days on market will probably follow this similar trend, actually probably splitting the difference in here. Interest rates, we're probably going to see a lot more of the same, small fluctuations up, small fluctuations down, and median list price should stay about where it is, but we will likely see that increase just slightly throughout the course of the year, just handling the normal inflationary measures. So that's going to do it for us as far as a year in review of the 2024 real estate market, Burlington, Camden, Gloucester counties, 900,000 below. But I hope this was helpful for everybody. Again, the biggest part that I want to take away from this is, while all of these things may be going on, and while we may be at the top of the market in some categories, you're never at the top of the market. You're just at the top of the moment. When you have to buy and when you have to sell, you're on the side of a mountain. If you look down, everything looks high from up here. But if you look up, you say, we always got a ways to go. If you're going to be buying for more than 3, 4, 5 years, don't worry so dang much about the tiny little details in here. Just do what's right for you, do what's right for the family, and it'll all work itself out in the end. Have a great year, everybody. Talk to you soon.